He didn't look dangerous. That's what everyone said. If you passed Jeffrey Dahmer on the street, you wouldn't stop. No warning signs, no chaos. Just a quiet man blending into the background. But that normal image hid something far darker, something he would later describe in a way that left even experienced interviewers shaken. Because when he finally spoke, he didn't deny anything. He didn't hesitate. He walked through it step by step, as if he were explaining something ordinary. And the most unsettling part. It wasn't just what he did. It was how calmly he explained why. He knew exactly how to disappear in plain sight. There was nothing flashy about his life. Jeffrey Dahmer worked a regular job, kept a low profile, and rarely drew attention. Neighbors saw someone quiet, maybe a little odd, but nothing that would make you think twice. That's what allowed everything to continue for so long. He didn't need to run or hide. He simply existed unnoticed. And that calm presence wasn't accidental. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, it made people lower their guard. Even when questions came up, he had an answer. Something simple, something believable, enough to move suspicion somewhere else. But underneath that controlled exterior, something much darker had already taken root. And it all goes back to a moment that changed everything. It started with a thought he couldn't shake. Years before anyone knew his name, Jeffrey Dahmer was already fixated on control, not anger, not revenge, just the idea of having complete dominance over another person and never having to let them go. At first, it stayed in his head, just fantasies, nothing real. Until 1978. That's when he met Stephen Hicks, an 18-year-old hitchhiker. Dahmer brought him back to his parents' house with no clear plan beyond wanting him to stay longer. But when Hicks tried to leave, something snapped. In that moment, the fantasy collided with reality and Dahmer acted. He later admitted it wasn't premeditated, but that didn't make it any less disturbing. Because once it happened, something shifted permanently. The line had been crossed, and instead of pulling back, he started to understand what it felt like. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went quiet. For years, it looked like he had stopped. After that first killing, Jeffrey Dahmer drifted into what seemed like a normal path. He joined the military, was stationed in Germany, and tried to build a routine. From the outside, it almost looked like he had regained control, like whatever happened in 1978 was isolated. But that wasn't the truth. Behind the scenes, his life was already unraveling. Heavy drinking took over. He was eventually discharged and sent back home. And during all those years, the urges never actually disappeared. He admitted later that nothing inside him had changed. The only thing missing was the chance to act on it. No opportunity, no privacy, no situation where he could carry out what he was thinking. So it wasn't restraint, it was delay, and the moment that opportunity came back, everything returned with it. That moment came out of nowhere, and it changed everything again. By the time Jeffrey Dahmer moved to Milwaukee, the thoughts were already back. He started going out more, putting himself in situations where he could meet people easily. One night, he brought a man back to a hotel room. This time, he claimed he didn't plan to hurt him, just to drug him and stay the night. But when he woke up the next morning, the man was dead. Dahmer said he had no memory of what happened, just fragments, bruises, confusion, and the realization that he had done it again. Whether that blackout was real or not, it didn't slow him down. If anything, it removed the last barrier he had left. Because now, there was no hesitation. He took the body, hit it, and handled it in a way that showed something had shifted even further. This wasn't panic anymore, it was process. And from that point on, it didn't stop. What came next was where everything took a darker turn. At first, it was about control. But for Jeffrey Dahmer, that wasn't enough anymore. He started taking photos of his victims, posing them, documenting them so he could remember them later. Then it escalated. He began keeping parts of their bodies, skulls, bones, things he believed would let him hold on to them permanently. He even described plans to build an altar. Not out of religion, but obsession. A place where he could sit, reflect, and relive everything. To him, it wasn't chaos, it was structure. A system built around never feeling alone again. And then came the part that shocked even the people interviewing him. He admitted to consuming parts of his victims, not out of hunger, but because he believed it made them a part of him. Permanently, that was the logic he used. That was how far the obsession had gone. But even that wasn't the limit. Because what he tried next crossed into something even more disturbing. Then he tried to take it even further. Control wasn't enough anymore for Jeffrey Dahmer. Keeping parts of his victims wasn't enough either. What he wanted now was someone who wouldn't leave at all. Someone who couldn't. So he started experimenting. He attempted to put his victims into a state where they would stay alive but without awareness. He used chemicals, injections, anything he thought might work. His goal was to create what he described as a zombie-like state, total control, no resistance, no independence. None of it worked. Every attempt failed. But that didn't stop him. It only pushed him further, deeper into the obsession. By this point, the line between reality and what he wanted had completely blurred. He wasn't reacting anymore, he was actively trying to reshape reality to fit his fixation. And somehow, despite how extreme this had become, he was still getting away with it, and that's what makes this part so hard to understand. Despite everything, Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was interacting with people constantly at bars, in public places, even with police. And more than once, he talked his way out of situations that should have ended everything. One moment stands out. A young boy was found outside, injured and clearly in distress. Neighbors called for help. When police arrived, Dahmer calmly explained that it was just a personal dispute, nothing serious, and somehow they believed him. They left the boy with him. That decision would cost a life. It wasn't just manipulation, it was timing, confidence, and the fact that no one expected someone like him to be capable of what he was doing. He understood that. He used it. But that pattern couldn't last forever. Because eventually someone didn't fall for it. The turning point came when one person didn't hesitate. Tracy Edwards managed to do what others couldn't. He escaped. After being brought to Dahmer's apartment, something inside him clicked into survival mode. He realized the situation wasn't normal, and in a moment of panic and instinct, he broke free and ran into the street. He flagged down police. At first, officers didn't expect what they were about to walk into, but when they followed him back, everything changed in seconds. Inside the apartment, they found evidence that couldn't be explained away. Photos, items, signs of what had been happening behind closed doors for years. The calm image Dahmer had built completely collapsed. There was no more talking his way out of it, no more explanations, no more control over the narrative. Everything he had hidden was now exposed at once. And just like that, it was over. After the arrest, everything unraveled quickly. For Jeffrey Dahmer, there was no more escaping, no more improvising answers. When the police confronted him with what they found, he didn't resist the way people expected. He didn't try to fight the situation. Instead, he started talking. And what came out wasn't denial. It was detail. He began confessing to everything, one case after another. Victims, locations, methods. He described it with a calmness that unsettled even seasoned investigators. There was no emotional explosion, no attempt to shift blame. Just structured explanations of what he had done. At that point, the focus shifted from who did this to how did this go on for so long? Because the scale of it was now undeniable. Years of actions, multiple victims, a pattern that had been hidden in plain sight. And yet, what he said next made it even harder to process. When investigators pushed deeper, the answers didn't get clearer, they got heavier. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't describe himself as confused or unaware. He didn't claim it was out of his control in the moment. Instead, he explained it as a growing obsession he never corrected, something he recognized early but didn't stop. He also made one thing clear. He didn't see race or background as the reason he chose victims. In his own words, it was about opportunity and physical attraction, not anything else people assumed at the time. That explanation didn't make it less disturbing. It made it more precise. Because it removed excuses. There was no single trigger, no sudden breakdown. Just repetition, escalation, and time. And the most unsettling part of his confession wasn't what he admitted doing. It was what he said about whether he could have ever stopped. When asked if he could have stopped, his answer was blunt. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't hesitate. He said the urges never fully left, even when things were quiet, even when he wasn't acting on them, they were still there. According to him, it was never a question of if it ends only when the next opportunity would appear. He went further. He admitted that even if he had never been caught, he believed the pattern would have continued. Not because of anger, not because of a single event, but because, in his own explanation, the compulsion itself never disappeared. That statement is what unsettled people most. Not the crimes alone, but the idea that awareness didn't automatically mean control. He could describe everything clearly, step by step, without confusion, but understanding it never changed the outcome. And that leads to the final question this entire story leaves behind. And that's where the story stops being just about one man. With Jeffrey Dahmer, everything is already known, the timeline, the victims, the arrest, the confession, but even after all of it is laid out, one thing doesn't fully make sense to most people. How something so extreme stayed hidden for so long in plain sight. There were warning signs, interactions with police, neighbors who sensed something was off, moments where things could have ended differently. And yet, each time, the situation slipped back into normality on the surface. That gap is what makes the case so disturbing. Not just the actions themselves, but the failures around them. In the end, Dahmer's own explanation doesn't really give comfort or closure. It doesn't simplify anything. If anything, it makes it more unsettling because it frames everything as a long process that escalated without interruption. And that leaves a final thought hanging over everything that happened. Some stories aren't just about what someone did. They're about how long it can go on before anyone realizes the full picture was there the whole time. There's one final layer that stays with people after hearing everything. Even inside prison, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't describe a dramatic transformation. He didn't claim the thoughts disappeared completely. He said there were still moments, old patterns of thinking that would return, even if he couldn't act on them anymore. But what changed wasn't just his situation, it was consequence. For the first time, the actions had a permanent boundary. No more opportunity. No more escalation. That contrast is what makes the case linger in public memory. A life where escalation went unchecked for years until it suddenly couldn't continue. And even then, the explanations he gave never fully answered the bigger question people still ask. How does something like this develop without being stopped earlier? There's no clean answer. No single moment that explains everything. Just a long chain of events, decisions, and missed signals that only make sense in hindsight. And that's what makes the story stay with people. Not just what happened, but how long it went on before anyone could see it clearly. That's the full arc, but the final takeaway is what sticks. With Jeffrey Dahmer, the most unsettling part isn't just the crimes themselves. It's how ordinary everything looked around them, a quiet routine, a familiar neighborhood, a man who didn't raise suspicion until it was far too late. Even after the arrest, even after the confessions, there's no version of this story that feels complete, because the explanation he gave never turns into something comforting or simple. It just shows a long pattern that kept building without interruption. And that leaves one uncomfortable thought behind. Sometimes the danger isn't hidden in chaos. Sometimes it's hidden in someone who looks completely normal right up until the moment everything comes out at once.